Welcome! In this video, I'll cover quick breads in Chapter 31 of your On Cooking textbook. What is a quick bread? Quick breads really get the names because they're quick to make and quick to bake. There's usually only a couple ingredients and they're relatively quick in the baking process. One of those main ingredients are going to be chemical leaveners, which really are contributing mainly to that leavening, to that rise of the product. And we'll talk about that here in just a moment. But a couple examples, your biscuits, your scones, there's a large variety of different muffins, your quick loaf breads, which are actually the same as your muffins, just formed and baked differently, and then some batters such as your pancakes and waffle batters. So going into your chemical leaveners, these are chemicals that are added into your products in order for them to rise, to cause that lifting motion in your products, to make them not dense and really tough. So your baking soda is what we'll start off with. Baking soda is your sodium bicarbonate, and alone this is an alkaline or a base product. If it is mixed with an acid, then it will produce carbon dioxide, which is the gas that is released causing that rise in your product. So a lot of recipes will incorporate some form of an acid naturally in it, such as a buttermilk or sour cream. You have lemon juice or honey, even molasses, even brown sugar, because there's molasses added back in there. There's several different natural acids that'll be in there, but cream of tartar could be added. But regardless, you want to make sure that you have the right amount of acid to counteract the right amount of your baking soda. If there is not enough acid in there, it'll leave a soapy taste. It'll leave baking soda unactivated in there. So it'll give a soapy, a basic alkaline taste there. When using baking soda as your chemical leavener in your products, it's important to bake it immediately after mixing. The baking soda will give off as soon as moisture starts to react with it, and will give off that carbon dioxide. If you've ever made pancakes before with your baking soda, you'll notice you mix them up, you start pouring them into the pan. The second time you go to pour them in, now your pancake batter is a lot thicker. It's a lot fluffier. It's because that carbon dioxide gas is starting to give off. And if you stir and expel that gas, your pancakes won't be as fluffy now moving forward. Another chemical leavener to talk about is your baking powder. Now, baking powder is kind of that fix to needing to counteract that, acidic value with that alkaline value. Baking powder then is going to be your baking soda combined already with the cream of tartar, which is your acid. They've already pre-formulated it for you, and have added some cornstarch in there just to help with the caking that will happen. Double acting versus single acting, the two main types. Single acting acts just as baking soda does. As soon as the moisture hits, it starts to give off a reaction. Versus double acting, it has a tiny reaction when the moisture hits it, but the main reaction of giving off those gases occurs with heat. So if you're using a pancake recipe, I think that's a great one to use baking powder in, because again, it will sit for a little while as you're doing multiple batches, versus if you were using your baking soda, that's probably why your second and third batches of pancakes are turning out rather flat. For the double acting baking powder, again, your cookies, your dough, whatever you're making with that can sit for a long period of time, even overnight, and then be baked at a later point. If you're using the baking soda, again, it's important to bake it immediately afterwards. You're going to counteract that baking soda with the amount of acid, and then if you need more leavener, that's when you're going to add some baking powder. So sometimes you could see baking soda and baking powder in there. Maybe there's only enough acid for the amount of baking soda, so now they've added some more baking powder in there. The third type of chemical leavener we'll talk about is baking ammonia, or this ammonium carbonate. It's pretty rare to find. You can get it at King Arthur Flour or some other specialty baking stores, usually online. But this is an ammonia product. It actually releases ammonia as well as carbon dioxide when it's giving off in the heat when it's reacting. This is usually used for crackers or thin cookies, something that has a large surface area, is very thin. That way this ammonia can all be given off by the time it reaches 140 degrees. All that ammonia is gone. The carbon dioxide really gives that extra crispness to your crackers and certain cookies. But again, not widely used for any other quick bread products, let alone any other large baking products. There are 3 different mixing methods we'll talk about with quick breads. The first is the creaming method, and something you will typically find with your cookies, which is covered in a later chapter, but still involves that creaming method. So you take softened butter and you whip, or I should say a softened fat, and you whip that with the sugar. You whip it until it's creamy, light and airy, then you're adding your eggs one at a time, then you add your dry ingredients, and then you'll add your liquid. This is the creaming method, and we talked about it a little bit before in our previous video. Moving on then, we're going to go to the biscuit method. The biscuit method involves cutting in your fat, similar to pie dough, as we'll talk about as well in a later chapter. I prefer to cut my fat into smaller pieces, and then using a pastry blender or 2 forks, or just putting my hands in some gloves and breaking up those fat pieces with the flour. I'm still looking for chunks of fat to be in there, but typically I'm looking for it to be pretty well incorporated. Then I'm going to go ahead and add my moisture, and then knead it just until it's incorporated well, give it a few turns, and then roll it out and cut my biscuits. I've included a video that I like where the chef is actually cutting her biscuits in a square form so that there's no waste, but typically they are made with round cutters. It's important when you cut them not to twist because it almost seals them, locks it in. We're not making Uncrustables here. We just want to go straight down with that cutter. And then when you're baking them, a trick too is so that they have more of an even rise, is to bake them when they're actually touching each other. So that way as they're rising, they're clinging to one another. But definitely try not to over knead them, as it'll result in a tougher product. And typically if you take those scraps and re-roll them, you'll find your second batch of biscuits then are a lot lower, and they're not quite as tender and flaky as your original batch was. And then lastly, we have the muffin method. The muffin method, I think by far is the easiest. You put all of your ingredients in a bowl and you mix. Typically we're talking about a liquid fat, whether it be melted butter, whether it be an oil, and then we're looking at all of your dry ingredients being combined, and then you have your wet ingredients. You mix them all until just moistened. And I even say leaving a little bit of flour particles in there is okay, because the more and more you mix these quick breads, the more they will become tough, and this tunneling will start to happen. Tunneling is when you have little holes running through your muffins or your quick breads. It's not necessarily a good thing. What's happening is you have overmixed it, and you have trapped these pockets inside. And really we want to mix just enough to get the gluten just starting, but not really to become too tough and tender to where it's going to be trapping these gas pockets inside. So when you're making blueberry muffins, I'd highly recommend measuring out all of your dry ingredients and then having your liquid ingredients, and then take a little bit of that dry out and toss it with those blueberries that you have. Mix your ingredients all together, and then at the last, I'd say about 10 seconds before you're done stirring, add your blueberries in there that were tossed with the flour. It'll help to coat them so that they don't start bleeding out that blue color or purple color, as well as the idea that it'll keep them kind of suspended in that batter a little bit better too. But then you are barely mixing until it's just about done, because even portioning it into your muffin cups, or you're still mixing it, you're still moving it around, and a few little flour particles is going to be much better than having a bunch of holes running throughout. So I highly recommend, again, just mixing until it's done. Same thing with like your pancake batter. The more and more you mix that pancake batter, the tougher those pancakes will be. You want light and fluffy. You're mixing just till combined. A few lumps are okay. It does not have to be perfectly smooth. And this concludes my video on quick breads. Thank you.